Hey guys, welcome to today's deep dive into one of history's most baffling and chilling cold cases. We're cracking open the Cipher Files to tackle a mystery that has haunted mountaineers, investigators, and conspiracy theorists for decades, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. If you want me to do more of these explorations into unsolved puzzles, like the video and subscribe. It's more useful than you think in telling me what kind of content resonates most with you. Also, seriously, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from or if you've ever heard whispers of this story before. Your insights are always appreciated, and it's cool to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in and see how it all goes, starting at the very beginning of this tragic and enigmatic journey. You are transported back in time, to late January 1959. The setting? The vast, unforgiving expanse of the northern Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union. This is where the chilling story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, sometimes whispered about as the Frozen Nine, Dyatlov's Last Stand, begins. It's a historical mystery that, despite occurring over 60 years ago deep within the Iron Curtain, captured the global imagination and refuses to let go. It became instantly famous, first within the Soviet Union due to the sheer strangeness and tragedy of the event, and later, as details slowly leaked out and the world became more connected, it garnered international notoriety. The question isn't just what happened, but why this particular case, among countless tragedies in remote places, has held such a tenacious grip on our collective consciousness. What is it about 9 experienced hikers, vanishing and then found in such bizarre circumstances, that continues to intrigue researchers, documentarians, and armchair detectives across generations? It feels like a code waiting to be broken, a cipher hidden within the snow and silence of the Urals. The premise of their expedition seemed straightforward enough, a challenging, yet ultimately achievable, winter trek. The group consisted of 10 individuals initially, led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were all experienced cross-country skiers and hikers, seasoned adventurers who had tackled difficult terrain before. Their purpose was ambitious but standard for keen explorers of that era, to complete a Grade 3 trek, the most difficult grading at the time, during the winter season. This involved covering roughly 300 kilometers, about 185 miles, through the northern Urals, specifically aiming for Otorten Mountain. Otorten translates roughly from the Monsey language as, "Don't go there," an ominous name given the events that unfolded, though locals insist it simply refers to wind patterns. The expedition was intended not just as a test of endurance and skill, but also as a kind of personal triumph, a significant achievement for young adventurers pushing their limits in the harsh Soviet wilderness. One member, Yuri Yudin, fell ill early in the trek and had to turn back, unknowingly escaping the fate of his companions. This left the final group at 7 men and 2 women. They were confident, well-equipped for the time, and in good spirits, as evidenced by the photos and journal entries recovered later. They were ready to face the wild. The environment they intended to traverse was anything but hospitable. The northern Urals are a vast, sparsely populated mountain range separating Europe and Asia. In late January and February, this region is characterized by extreme cold, with temperatures often plummeting far below freezing, sometimes reaching -30 degrees Celsius -22 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. Blizzards are frequent and can appear with little warning, bringing blinding snow, high winds, and whiteout conditions. The terrain itself is challenging, a mix of taiga forests giving way to treeless mountain slopes and plateaus as elevation increases. The area they were heading towards, including Kholat Syakhl, which means dead mountain, in Monsey, another name that would become tragically relevant, is particularly remote and desolate. There are very few permanent settlements, and navigation relies heavily on skill, experience, and traditional methods. Survival requires constant vigilance, expert knowledge of winter camping, and the ability to react quickly to changing conditions. This was not a leisurely stroll, it was a serious undertaking requiring respect for the raw power of nature. The 9 hikers knew this, they were prepared for hardship, cold, and isolation. They understood the risks inherent in pushing into such a wilderness. Yet, even with all their preparation and experience, they were venturing into an environment that held secrets, a place where something entirely unexpected and utterly terrifying was waiting. It's this stark contrast between their preparedness and the mystery of their demise that fuels the enduring intrigue of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. You can almost feel the biting wind, see the endless white landscape, and sense the profound isolation they must have experienced in those final, chilling days. They set off with purpose and optimism, unaware that the journey itself would become the mystery. So, the story really begins with the group itself. You're looking at 9 experienced cross-country skiers and hikers, mostly students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. Their goal? A challenging, Category 3 winter trek through the northern Urals, aiming to reach Mount Otorten, a peak whose name translates roughly to, "Don't go there," in the Monsey language. Kind of ominous in hindsight, isn't it? They set out in late January of 1959. We know their journey through their own eyes, literally. The group kept diaries, multiple members jotting down observations, thoughts, and even jokes along the way. And critically, they took photographs. Lots of them. These diaries and photos are invaluable. They offer a chronological record, a visual and written narrative of the days leading up to the tragedy. They are our primary source for reconstructing this unfolding trek. Their journey starts conventionally enough. Train rides, first to Ivdel, then a shorter one to Vizhay, the last inhabited settlement of any significant size before the deep wilderness. From Vizhay, they catch a truck ride to a smaller logging settlement called Severny, or North. By January 27, they've arrived at Severny, and this is where the true wilderness phase begins. They strap on their skis, load up their heavy packs, weighing around 50 pounds each, maybe more, and start skiing northwards, following the path of the Lozva River. The initial days are tough but seemingly routine for experienced trekkers like these. The photos from this period show them in good spirits, setting up tents, posing with skis, eating meals, tackling snowy terrain. The diary entries reflect the daily grind, the cold, the effort, but also camaraderie and optimism. An important event happens early on January 28. One member of the group, Yuri Yudin, has to turn back. He's suffering from sciatica and can't continue. It's a difficult decision for him, leaving his friends, but necessary for his health. He says his goodbyes and returns to Severny while the remaining 9 continue on. This means the group originally planned for 10 people is now down to 9. Yudin is the sole survivor of the original trekking party. His departure, while a deviation, is documented and understood. It's a planned loss, not a mysterious one, but it means we lose one potential witness to the remaining days. For the next few days, from January 29 to January 31, the group progresses deeper into the forest and along the river. The diaries mention setting up camps, dealing with snowy conditions, and building a labaz, which is essentially a hidden storage area for supplies they won't need for the final push towards Otorten. This cached food and equipment would make their return journey faster and lighter. Building the labaz is standard practice for this type of trek. It's another sign of their experience and planning. By February 1, the critical day, the group has left the denser forest behind and is moving into more open terrain, the foothills of the mountains. Their goal for the day is to cross a pass and set up camp on the other side, ideally in a sheltered spot, before making their ascent towards Otorten. However, something happens late in the day on February 1. According to their last diary entries and the location of their final camp, they don't make it over the pass as planned. The terrain is becoming more exposed, the weather likely deteriorating with increasing wind and possibly reduced visibility. They are approaching the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, the mountain that will later bear witness to the tragedy. Instead of finding a sheltered spot lower down or pushing over the pass, they make the decision, recorded in the final diary entries and confirmed by their tent's location, to set up camp right there, on the relatively exposed slope of Kholat Syakhl, partway up the mountain. The last known photographs and diary entries come from this day, documenting their arrival in the area and the process of setting up the tent. Why camp there? It wasn't the most obvious or safest spot. Was it due to poor weather closing in quickly? Had they gotten delayed earlier in the day? Were they simply more tired than expected? The records from this final day are sparse compared to previous ones, offering just glimpses. The final diary entry we have is believed to have been written late on February 1st, perhaps as they were setting up camp or just after. It describes the wind and the cold, the process of preparing the campsite. The last photos show them digging into the snow to pitch the tent, the vast, white expanse of the mountain slope stretching behind them. This camp, established late on February 1, 1959, on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, is the last known location of the 9 trekkers. The diaries and photographs stop here. The chronological reconstruction of their journey ends at this point, on that windy, snowy mountainside, just before the long night falls. The period from the moment they zipped up their tent on the evening of February 1 until they failed to report back on time is the void where the mystery truly begins. Search efforts begin, but not immediately. Initially, when the group fails to report back on their expected date, it's not seen as a major issue. Expeditions in the Urals often take longer than planned, and they were experienced hikers. However, as the days tick by and still nothing is heard, concern mounts. Relatives begin to press for action. By February 20, roughly 3 weeks after they set out and well past their expected return, official search parties are mobilized. Student volunteers from the university join in, along with military and civilian rescuers. The search focuses on the area around Mount Kholat Syakhl. The weather is harsh, typical Ural winter conditions with deep snow, low temperatures, and unpredictable blizzards. It's difficult terrain even in good conditions. They scour the planned route, scanning the vast, white landscape. Then, on February 26, rescuers spot something on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. It's a tent. But as they approach, the scene immediately sends a chill down their spines. The tent isn't simply collapsed, it's partially buried in snow, and it appears to have been cut open from the inside. Belongings, shoes, clothing, food, cameras, diaries, are strewn around inside, but there are no people. It looks as if the occupants left in an extreme hurry, leaving essential survival gear behind. Outside the tent, they find a set of footprints leading downhill towards the edge of a nearby forest. The tracks are distinctive, some bare or in socks, others in single shoes or Valenki boots, inconsistent and scattered. The prints indicate around 9 people, though it's hard to be exact in the drifting snow. Crucially, these prints suggest the group walked or perhaps shuffled away, not ran in a blind panic, at least not initially. This discovery is the first piece of concrete evidence, and it immediately presents a profound puzzle. Why would experienced hikers cut their way out of their tent in sub-zero temperatures and leave their supplies behind? Following the tracks towards the tree line, about 1.5 kilometers downhill, rescuers make a second, horrifying discovery. Under a large cedar tree, they find the remains of a campfire and, nearby, the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. They are sparsely dressed, especially considering the brutal cold. Doroshenko is found with burns on his foot and hand. The tree itself shows signs of struggle, branches are broken off up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone might have climbed it, perhaps looking for something or trying to escape something on the ground. But escape what? Between the cedar tree and the tent, 3 more bodies are found in the following days: Igor Dyatlov, the group leader, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They appear to have died while trying to return to the tent, scattered at various distances up the slope. Their postures and positions suggest collapse from exposure and exhaustion, but the chilling question remains: why were they trying to get back to the tent after fleeing it? What were they running from in the first place? The final 4 bodies, Ludmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, aren't found until May, after the snow has melted. They are discovered in a ravine deep in the forest, further downhill from the cedar tree, buried under several meters of snow. And it is with these 4 bodies that the evidence becomes truly baffling, introducing layers of mystery that defy simple explanation. Let's delve into the verifiable evidence gathered from the scene and the subsequent investigation, because this is where the conventional explanations begin to fall apart. First, the state of the bodies and their injuries. While the initial bodies found on the slope showed signs consistent with hypothermia, bluish skin, frostbite, Slobodan had a crack in his skull, though investigators initially deemed it non-fatal and likely caused by a fall. But the four found in the ravine present a different story. Dubinina and Zolotaryov sustained massive, crushing injuries, fractured ribs, broken skulls, described by the medical examiner as force equivalent to a high-speed car crash. Yet, bizarrely, there were no external marks on their skin or tissue to indicate what caused these severe internal injuries. No large bruises, no impact points. It's as if they were crushed from within or by something soft but incredibly powerful. The Brignoles also had significant skull trauma. Kolevatov had various lesser injuries, but nothing immediately fatal. Even more disturbing are the specific findings on Dubinina and Zolotaryov. Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of her face tissue, and a piece of her skull bone. Zolotaryov was missing his eyes. These are details that scream foul play or something grotesque, but the official investigation concluded these were likely post-mortem, caused by scavenging animals in the months they were buried under snow. Yet, the location and depth of the missing tongue are difficult to reconcile with typical animal scavenging patterns. Then there's the clothing. The distribution and state of their garments are incredibly odd. The first bodies were lightly dressed. But the later bodies, especially those in the ravine, were much more heavily clothed, wearing multiple layers, jackets, hats. It became clear that some of the clothing items found on the later bodies belonged to those found earlier. For instance, Dubinina was found wearing Krivonischenko's pants and jacket. Zolotaryov was wearing Dubinina's hat and coat, while also having Krivonischenko's felt boot on one foot. This suggests that after fleeing the tent, some of the survivors attempted to salvage clothing from the deceased or from caches further down the slope. But why were they so poorly dressed in the first place when they fled? Here's another chilling piece of forensic evidence: radiation. Testing on some of the clothing items, specifically those found on Krivonischenko and Kolevatov, revealed traces of beta radiation. The levels weren't acutely lethal, but they were higher than normal and significant enough to be noted in the official report. Radiation is a highly unusual finding in a remote mountain wilderness expedition. Where did it come from? Was it on the clothing before the incident, perhaps from their work or other exposure? Or was it connected to whatever caused the event itself? This detail adds another layer of inexplicable mystery to the already complex scene. The official reports from the initial 1959 investigation are themselves a crucial piece of evidence, but also a source of frustration. The investigation was closed relatively quickly, concluding that the group died due to a compelling natural force, which they were unable to overcome. The file was classified and sent to a secret archive. This conclusion feels incredibly weak and unsatisfactory when juxtaposed with the bizarre injuries, the radiation, the cut tent, and the strange clothing choices. It explains how they died, hypothermia, trauma, but offers no credible explanation for why they were in that situation to begin with. The report acknowledges the key pieces of evidence but fails to connect them logically to a known natural phenomenon. The photographs and diary entries found at the scene and on the bodies provide invaluable context, yet only deepen the mystery. The diaries meticulously document the group's journey, their spirits high, jokes shared, the daily grind of setting up camp. The photos show them smiling, building snow shelters, preparing meals, everything seemingly normal right up until the day before their deaths. The very last frames on some cameras are blurry, chaotic, perhaps taken in haste or confusion. They capture indistinct shapes, light anomalies, but nothing concrete to explain the terror that must have unfolded. These personal records are strong evidence of their state of mind and activities before the event, highlighting the sudden, unexplained shift to panic and disaster. But they are weak in providing a direct cause for that panic. Environmental data confirms that it was extremely cold, likely with strong winds on the exposed slope. But was it cold or windy enough to force 9 experienced hikers, trained in winter survival, to slash their tent and run nearly 2 kilometers downhill, leaving their gear? Unlikely, experts agree. Whiteout conditions or an avalanche have been proposed, but the tent's location, on a relatively gentle slope, not directly under an overhang, and the distinct tracks leading away argue against a typical avalanche scenario. The lack of snow accumulation inside the cut tent also seems to contradict a sudden burial by snow. In summary, the discovery revealed a scene of inexplicable panic and bizarre consequences. The evidence is verifiable: the cut tent, the tracks, the distribution of bodies, the types of injuries, severe internal trauma without external signs, the strange clothing transfers, the radiation on some garments, the timeline from diaries and photos, the official findings, however inadequate. Each piece on its own is puzzling, but together, they form a constellation of inconsistencies that standard explanations struggle to reconcile. Why the internal injuries? Where did the radiation come from? What force was powerful enough to inflict such trauma but leave no external mark? And most fundamentally, what drove these 9 people to abandon the safety of their tent in the deadly cold and flee into the night? The evidence is real, tangible, and deeply, profoundly mysterious. So, with all that disturbing evidence laid out, the torn tent, the scattered bodies, the strange injuries, the odd clothing choices, the lingering questions about the initial investigation, investigators and onlookers were left scrambling. What could possibly explain this scene? Over the decades, numerous hypotheses have been put forward, each trying to piece together the fragments of this bizarre puzzle. Let's try to peel back the layers of some of the major ones, examining what makes sense and what just doesn't quite fit. Perhaps the most immediate thought, given the location, leans towards nature. Could an avalanche have been the culprit? The theory suggests a small slab avalanche or even just accumulating snow could have slid onto the tent. This might explain why they cut their way out in a panic, fearing being buried alive. It's a natural, powerful force that fits the environment. However, there are significant problems with this. First, experts who have studied the site say the slope wasn't steep enough for a typical avalanche. More critically, investigators found no significant avalanche debris near the tent. The tent itself wasn't crushed, it was standing, albeit sliced open. And the footprints leading away from the tent? They were clearly visible, suggesting the snow surface wasn't churned up by a slide. If an avalanche hit, wouldn't the tracks have been obliterated? So, while initially plausible, the evidence on the ground seems to strongly contradict the avalanche theory. What about just extreme weather? The Urals in winter are unforgiving. Fierce winds, blizzards, and rapidly dropping temperatures are commonplace. Could a sudden, violent storm have hit, terrifying the group and forcing them out? You can picture the scene: the wind howls, the tent buckles, they fear it collapsing or being ripped away, so they flee for perceived shelter lower down the slope. This could explain the hurried exit and maybe even the state of undress if they left in a panic without fully dressing. But again, it doesn't explain everything. Why cut the tent rather than just unzipping the flap? Why abandon their critical supplies, especially warm clothing? And crucially, how does a storm explain the specific, severe injuries found on some of the bodies: fractured ribs, a crushed skull, internal trauma with no external wounds? Wind and cold cause hypothermia and frostbite, not these kinds of impact injuries. Speaking of cold, hypothermia undoubtedly played a major role in the deaths of most of the group. But hypothermia is typically the result of being exposed to cold, not the initial cause of leaving shelter. Why were they outside in inadequate clothing in the first place? This is where the chilling phenomenon of paradoxical undressing sometimes comes up. In the late stages of hypothermia, some individuals experience a sudden sensation of being intensely hot, leading them to remove their clothes, effectively sealing their fate. This could explain why some were found nearly naked in freezing temperatures. But, like the other natural theories, it doesn't explain the cutting of the tent, the signs of panic, or the violent, non-cold-related injuries on certain individuals. It's a piece of the puzzle, perhaps explaining how some died in the cold, but not why they were in that situation or how others sustained such trauma. Moving away from nature, could human factors within the group be the key? Was there some kind of internal conflict? Maybe an argument or a fight broke out, leading to panic and everyone fleeing the tent. Perhaps someone went mad. It's a dark thought, suggesting violence among comrades. However, there is absolutely no evidence from the campsite or the bodies to support this. The tent wasn't damaged by a struggle, it was cut from the inside. The footprints showed people leaving calmly at first, in a line, not a chaotic fight. And the injuries, while severe, don't resemble typical injuries from a brawl among hikers. Rib fractures and head trauma sustained this way would usually show external bruising and signs of struggle, which were absent on those found lower down. The group was known to be cohesive and experienced. This theory feels like a stretch without any supporting evidence. What about just pure, unadulterated panic, triggered by something? They were scared out of the tent, cut their way out, and fled down the slope. This fits the initial chaotic exit and the state of undress. But what caused the panic? And how does panic alone explain the specific injuries? This leads us into more complex and often controversial theories. Could there have been military involvement? The area wasn't far from Soviet military testing grounds. Some theories propose secret weapons tests, perhaps a parachute mine, a low-altitude explosion, or even a new type of weapon that caused disorientation or injury. Supporting points include the strange color found on some skin, the elevated levels of radiation on certain items of clothing, and the initial secrecy surrounding the investigation. The crushed injuries could potentially be consistent with a blast wave or being thrown against something by force. However, there's no concrete proof of a test happening exactly at that time and place. Why would a test target innocent hikers? And wouldn't there be more evidence of an explosion or military activity at the site? The radiation levels found were relatively low and could potentially have come from contaminated clothing or equipment they brought with them from their jobs. The secrecy might have been standard Soviet procedure for any unusual death or simply to avoid panic. Another intriguing, albeit speculative, theory involves infrasound. This proposes that unique wind conditions interacting with the topography of the pass could have generated low-frequency sound waves, infrasound, below the range of human hearing but capable of inducing feelings of anxiety, panic, disorientation, nausea, and even pain. If this happened during the night, it could explain why the group, suddenly overcome by inexplicable terror or discomfort, cut their way out of the tent in a desperate attempt to escape the source of the sound. Running downhill away from the pass would make sense if the infrasound was localized. It could explain the panic and flight. However, it doesn't explain the severe injuries sustained by some, or the radiation, or the odd state of some bodies being found on top of others. It provides a potential trigger for the initial panic but leaves other key anomalies unanswered. Finally, you have the theories that venture into the realm of the truly unknown phenomena, everything from Yeti encounters to alien interactions to strange energy forces. While compelling in their mystery, these theories generally lack any concrete, testable evidence at the site. The investigation found human footprints, signs of human activity, and injuries consistent with physical trauma, albeit of an unusual nature. Attributing the events to something entirely unknown moves beyond the scope of forensic analysis and into pure speculation, which is why official inquiries tend to discount them. As you look at all these possibilities, the core of the mystery becomes clear. No single, simple explanation, be it avalanche, storm, fight, or animal attack, seems to account for all the evidence: the cut tent, the ordered exit turning into panic, the spread of the bodies, the varying states of dress, and critically, the severe, specific internal injuries on some victims alongside others who died purely from hypothermia. Each theory has holes, pieces of the puzzle it can't explain. It's the combination of seemingly unrelated anomalies that makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so enduringly baffling and keeps the questions lingering in the air. So, we've traversed the unforgiving slopes, examined the perplexing evidence, and sifted through a multitude of theories, each trying to wrestle some sense from the chaos that unfolded on that mountainside decades ago. But where does that leave us today? What is the official stance now, and why, despite attempts at resolution, does the Dyatlov Pass incident continue to hold us in its icy grip? The current state of the case is fascinating because, officially, it has been closed. After decades of relative silence and speculation, the Russian Prosecutor General's office reopened the investigation in 2019, largely in response to renewed public interest and persistent calls for clarity. They aimed to finally provide a definitive, official answer to the question of what killed the 9 experienced hikers. After months of work, including simulations, forensic analysis, and even visiting the site, their conclusion was delivered in July 2020. The official findings stated that the deaths were caused by an avalanche. Specifically, it posited that a slab avalanche occurred overnight, burying the tent and forcing the hikers to cut their way out in extreme cold, fleeing to what they believed was safety lower down the slope. Their subsequent attempts to return to the tent or build shelter failed, leading to hypothermia. The more severe injuries, they suggested, could have been sustained during the panicked escape or subsequent falls in the darkness and rough terrain. Now, you might hear that and think, okay, case closed. But here's why it remains so widely considered unsolved and controversial, even with an official stamp. This conclusion, while addressing one major potential cause, struggles to fully explain all the anomalies we've talked about. Why cut the tent from the inside? Why leave seemingly essential survival gear behind? Why the strange state of dress, with some half-naked and others swapping clothes? If it was a simple panicked retreat from an avalanche, why the seemingly organized yet doomed efforts to build a fire or return to the tent? And those injuries on Dubinina, Zolotarev, and Thibault-Brignoles, the broken ribs, the fractured skull, the missing eyes and tongue, explaining those solely through falls or the initial avalanche impact still strains credulity for many. The state of the bodies, found months later, and the potential presence of radiation also continue to niggle at the edges of the official narrative, even if downplayed or dismissed in the final report. The official version feels, to many, like a puzzle piece forced into place, bending the edges of the surrounding pieces rather than fitting seamlessly. It provides an answer, but perhaps not the answer that accounts for the totality of the bizarre evidence. This lingering lack of a universally accepted truth has had profound long-term consequences. For the families of the 9 hikers, the mystery has been a decades-long source of pain, uncertainty, and a desperate search for closure that has been repeatedly denied or offered in unsatisfying forms. Imagine living with the knowledge that your child, your sibling, died in such horrific and inexplicable circumstances, with no clear story to grasp onto. For years, information was sparse, the initial investigation seemed rushed, and subsequent inquiries or official statements have often felt incomplete or contradictory. This has fueled their own efforts to understand, to keep the case alive, and to challenge official narratives they find inadequate. The investigators involved, particularly those from the initial search and inquiry, also carried the weight of this mystery. Think about investigator Lev Ivanov, who initially pursued the more unconventional leads before being seemingly pressured to close the case with a simple, force majeure, conclusion. This case likely haunted his career and conscience. Even those involved in later inquiries, like the one in 2019 to 2020, face intense scrutiny from a global community of amateur sleuths and professional researchers determined to poke holes in any proposed solution. The Dyatlov Pass doesn't just demand answers, it challenges those who seek to provide them. Regarding mountain safety regulations, the direct impact of the Dyatlov incident is somewhat harder to quantify specifically because the official conclusions have varied or been contested over time. However, the event itself, a stark reminder of the deadly power of the wilderness and the rapid deterioration of situations in remote environments, undoubtedly filtered into the collective consciousness of Soviet-era and modern Russian mountain safety. It highlighted the critical importance of proper equipment, experienced leadership, clear communication plans, and perhaps most importantly, the need for meticulous attention to environmental factors, including the potential for avalanches or sudden weather shifts, even on seemingly safe routes. While not necessarily leading to specific, named, Dyatlov regulations, it stands as a cautionary tale embedded in the culture of Russian outdoor enthusiasts, a grim reminder of how quickly paradise can turn lethal. So, why does this story, nearly 65 years on, still capture our imaginations so completely? Why does it resonate across continents and generations? I think it's precisely because it defies easy explanation. It's a perfect storm of elements that intrigue us: the remote, forbidding location, the youth and experience of the victims, the chilling physical evidence that seems to whisper conflicting stories, the backdrop of a secretive Soviet state, and the sheer, confounding strangeness of it all. It touches on our primal fears of the unknown, the power of nature unleashed, and the possibility that some truths remain stubbornly beyond our grasp. It's a genuine historical enigma, a cold case that refuses to stay buried under the snow or official paperwork. Every detail invites speculation, every unanswered question pulls you deeper into the mystery. It's a puzzle box that, despite countless attempts, has never been fully unlocked. And perhaps, on some level, we're drawn to that challenge, compelled to try and decode the cipher left on that desolate mountainside. What do you think? We've explored many angles, many possibilities. Does the official avalanche theory feel right to you, or does something still feel off? Is there a theory we didn't delve into that you find compelling? Have you researched this yourself and come across details that stand out? Share your thoughts. Let's discuss this enduring mystery. Your perspective is part of the ongoing conversation around this case. This story, the Dyatlov Pass Incident, is a chilling reminder of the power and unpredictability of nature, certainly. But more than that, it's a testament to the enduring power of a mystery that resists simple answers. For the families of Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Rustem Slobodin, Georgy Krivonischenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, and Alexander Zolotarev, the consequences are etched in decades of grief and a persistent lack of satisfying closure. Their lives were forever marked by that tragic winter journey. For the investigators, both past and present, this case represents a professional challenge and, perhaps, a personal burden, the weight of an unsolved puzzle that continues to demand attention and stir debate. And for all of us, the interested public, the Dyatlov Pass serves as a powerful narrative about the limits of our understanding, the ways in which even the most rigorous investigations can leave crucial questions unanswered, and how certain events can lodge themselves in history, refusing to fade away. It teaches us, perhaps, that not every code can be fully cracked, and some secrets may remain buried, just like those lost souls on that snowy slope, forever a part of the landscape and the lore. The conversation, the speculation, the quest for understanding, that legacy continues.